Lord bless everyone, and today I wish to speak about Genesis 13. We're going to speak about the difference between Abraham, and Lot, his nephew. But we first need to get in the nitty-gritty of the passage. This is before this. Now let's start reading. Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all they had, and Lot with him to the south. The word south there is the Negev. It's telling you the location where Abram went. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. You remember that God had told him in Genesis 12 that he will bless him? He said, I will bless you. And well, God says something, he means it, And Abraham got blessed financially. He was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. In verse 3 it says, And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. The same location, we could see that he was there in the beginning, in Genesis 12, verse 8. And he moved there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. He went where he began with the Lord. Sometimes we have to go where we began. Sometimes God has to remember us where he took us out from. And read in verse 4, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Well, you could see that in Genesis 13, verse 4, but the reference is to Genesis 12, verse 8. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. All the relationship that Abraham had with God was an amazing relationship. And this is the thing. Many times when in our Christian walk, we have to remember where God took us from. We have to remember where he took us from. I believe it's Psalms 103, it says. Let's go to Psalms 103. Psalms 103 says, Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from destruction, who crowns you with loving kindness and tender mercy. It says, forget not all your benefits. Oh, we need to be reminded of where he took us from. And it may be that sometimes that we come to receiving falls in our Christian walk because we have to remember where he took us from. Or sometimes we don't remember. Sometimes we become so proud and we seem to look at people so down, like we're better than them. But yet, God made Abraham remember to go back in the beginning. Remember your first love. That's what Jesus told the church of Ephesians. Remember your first love. I have this against you, that you have... Let's go to Ephesians. Actually, Revelation 2. When Jesus is talking to the church of Ephesians. And he says, nevertheless, I have this against you. This is Revelation 2, verse 4. That you have left your first love. I think there's a Bible version that says, you have forgotten. NIV says, you have forsaken. New King James says, you have left. I believe there's another translation that will say, you have left. There's the LEB. Let's just look around and see what the other one says. You have left. The Amplify says that. You have turned away. The BBE says that. But God is telling us, I want you to remember where I took you from. It's so easy for us to forget. And He needs to remind us. The Greek word is it's pronounced the word apheikes, to abandon, to release, to depart from, to let, to suffer, to permit, to leave alone, to neglect. And the list could go on and on. It's so easy for us to forsake our first love. And Abraham knew that. So he went back to where he began. And sometimes in the Christian walk, we have to go back to where we began. And we read and it says in verse 4 of Genesis 13. To the place of the altar which he had made there at first, and there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. You mean to say that Abraham for a moment may have gone cold in his walk? I believe so. He sure was acting cold in his walk when he wasn't trusting God. When he told Pharaoh, this is my sister. Doesn't matter how we begin in the Christian walk. At times we grow cold. And Abraham needed to go in the beginning where he first started to start calling on God more. To remember where God took him from. We read in verse 5. Lot also, who went with Abraham, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. God had a calling for Abraham, and God had a calling for Lot. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you will go to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Lot. There's lots to speak about these verses which I just read. But I want you to notice that Lot is a fleshy man. Lot, though a believer in God, was a fleshly man and was given to the lust of the eyes, of what he saw, which was opposite from Abraham, who was a spiritual man and was not given to lust. The Bible tells us in 1 John 2:15 to 17, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of the God abides forever. And if you look at these two men, Lot looked for the better for Lot than for himself. Let me repeat this. Abraham looked for the better of Lot than himself. He cared more for Lot than he cared for himself. Abraham could have taken the best part of the land and said to Lot, hey, go somewhere else. No, Abraham said, Lot, you choose, and I'll just go the opposite. I'll humble myself. Those who humble themselves do get exalted in time. And Abraham, he humbled himself. He said, Lot, I let you get the best part of the land. I'm a man that I don't care exactly where I go because I'm walking with God. You know, you could have nothing in this world, but if you have Jesus, you have everything you need. Now, you can have everything you want in this world, and if you don't have Jesus, you have nothing that is profitable for you, nothing that will benefit you. You are spiritually bankrupt. And Lot was spiritually bankrupt. He wanted his goods now. He wanted the best part of the land now. This reminds me of the story of patience and passion from the Pilgrim's Progress. It begins with the interpreter taking Christian to see two children. One was named Patience, and the other one was named Passion. Let's listen to this story, for it has great insight.
And led him into a little room where sat two little children, each one in his chair. The name of the eldest was Passion, and the name of the other, Patience. Passion seemed to be very discontented, but Patience was very quiet. Then Christian asked, "Why is Passion discontented?" The interpreter answered, "Their governor would have him wait for his best things until the beginning of next year. But Passion wants them all now. Patience, however, is willing to wait." Then I saw that one came to Passion and brought him a bag of treasure and poured it down at his feet, which Passion then took up rejoicingly and laughed Patience to scorn. But I watched, and it was not long before he had spent it all lavishly and had nothing left but rags. "Explain this matter to me more fully," said Christian. "These two lads are figures," said interpreter. "Passion represents the men of this world, and Patience the men of that which is to come, as you have seen. Passion will have all now, this year, that is to say, in this world. So are the men of this world, who must have all their good things now. They cannot wait until next year, that is, until the next world, for their portion of good. That proverb, A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, is of more authority with them than are all the divine testimonies about the good of the world to come. But as you saw, he quickly wasted all and had nothing left except rags. So will it be with all such men at the end of this world. Christian said, Now I see that patience is the wiser in many ways. First, because he waits for the best things, and second, because he will have the glory when the other has nothing but rags. Interpreter said, And you may add another, and that is, the glory of the next world will never wear out, whereas the good things of this world are suddenly gone. Therefore Passion did not have as much reason to laugh at Patience because he had his good things first, as Patience will have to laugh at Passion because he had his best things last. For first must give place to last, because last will have his time to come. But last gives place to nothing, for there is not another to succeed. He therefore who has his portion first must have a time to spend it, but he that has his portion last must have it lastingly. Therefore it is said of Dives, Thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. Christian said, Then I perceive that it is not best to covet things that are now, but to wait for things to come. You speak the truth, said Interpreter. For the things that are seen are temporal, but the things that are not seen are eternal. Since things present are such near neighbors to our fleshly appetite, and since things to come are such strangers to our carnal sense, therefore the first of these suddenly fall into amity, and a distance continues between the second.
Now, let's listen to a hymn, and then we'll continue with this. I think that's probably spoke a lot to our lives, and it gave us a comparison between patience and passion. Patience, you could say, was Abraham. Passion was Lot. Patience. Abraham was patient. He was willing to wait for his benefits, for what God had for him. Lot, he wanted his now. And if you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, how it got destroyed, and Lot ended up in a cave, and ended up even having sexual intercourse with his daughters and getting them pregnant and having nothing to show for. All this land was eventually that he looked at was destroyed. He ended up with nothing. Abraham, on the other hand, he kept on getting more blessed. Because sometimes there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end is a ways of destruction. And Lot was a man of the flesh. He let his eyes make his decisions. And he didn't care so much about Abraham, but Abraham cared about him. Abraham knew God will take care of him. Let's listen to that hymn. God will take care of you.
Yes, He does take care of us. We have a lot to be thankful for. Even when sometimes it doesn't feel like things are going the way that we would like it to. He does take care of us.
God takes care of us. It's an important lesson to know. He will take care of us. He took care of Abraham. And Abraham looked to the things ahead. He wasn't so much worried about that now. Yes, he had his falls, and you could judge Abraham for all the mistakes he did. But he always thought about the future. He always thought about what's ahead of him. The spiritual man always thinks about the things ahead of him. He don't care about the present. His future is more important. He's more concerned about the life which is to come than about the current situations that seems to pass away. This world and all his worries and all his troubles will pass away. Read in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 18. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. We look at the things that are not seen. That is the life of the Christian. They are to worry about the things that are not seen. They're not to worry about what things are going to pass away eventually. If you worry about the things that are going to pass away, you'll be a miserable person. Because everything passes away. Romans 8:24 says, For we were saved in this hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For why does one still hope for what he sees? That's not hope. But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. And that is the story of Abraham. He hoped things would get better, and he did. And he waited this. He was patient with that. And he persevered in that, and he saw God's glory. Yes, God blessed Abraham. And Lot wasn't as blessed. We could learn from these two men. Why not to let ourselves go by what we see? Because it will eventually fail us. In verse 10 of chapter 13 of Genesis, it says, And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan. He looked, he lusted after the plain of Jordan. He probably believed, I'm going to be blessed with this. Sometimes there are things that we may consider a blessing, but ends up being a curse because it doesn't have God's favor. Oh, yes. There are things in this life that we might think, it's a blessing to have this or that. And it ends up being a curse because it wasn't God's will. Because you didn't put people ahead of you. You stepped people down to get to where you wanted to get. In Joshua 7, verse 11, Achan spoke about how he fell into sin. And he said, Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant which I commanded them. For they have taken some... Wait a minute. It's actually Joshua 7. Forgive me. It was Joshua 7, verse 20. And Achan answered Joshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and this is what I have done. Verse 21 of Joshua 7. When I saw among the spoils a beautiful Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. I desired them. I coveted them. I desired them. That's how Achan fell. Eve also fell with that, with the lust of the eyes. The Bible says in verse 6 of Genesis 3, so when the woman saw that the tree of life, let me repeat myself. So when the woman saw that the tree of good, knowledge of good and evil was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. It was pleasant, desirable thing. Don't let ourselves go by the sight that we see. Sometimes something may seem beautiful, and in the end it ends up being a curse. Surely Lot could give us an example of that. He saw Sodom and Gomorrah as a beautiful thing, as something precious to the eyes, and God was like, I'm going to have to teach you a lesson. You should have not taken that. But Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw the plain of the Jordan. It was a fleshly thing. It looked beneficial. But this is the thing. It wasn't Abram's to take with him Lot, and yet he took Lot with him. He was supposed to take his wife, and that was it. But Abram wanted to take more than he was supposed to. God told Abram in Genesis 12, Now the Lord has said to Abram, Get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Get out of your family. I want you to separate. But yeah, Abram did not listen. He took Lot with him. And then what happened? A problem with the herdsman, with Lot's herdsman and Abram's herdsman. They didn't get along. The land could not hold them both. They both had a different calling, and their calling were big. Eventually, nations came out from Lot's descendants, just like from Abram's descendants, nations was going to come out from there too. And it was right after Lot left to Sodom. We read in verse 13 of Genesis 13. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. Sin has an attraction. Let's not listen to its attraction. Let's not pay attention to his voice. Anyway, in verse 14, we see after Lot has separated, the Lord then pays a second visit to Abraham. He visited him before and he told him to get out of your family. Abraham didn't listen. He left. Yes, Abraham left his country, but he took with him his family. Then you see, Abraham's brother dying. And we see Abraham's father dying. And then we see fictions between Lot and Abraham. So much so that they had to separate. Trust me, God will always get his will. Even if you're a spiritual man, you always end up sometimes being disobedient. And God has to redirect the traffic, as one will say. He has to redirect things and make it so that those people who you had at one point, you can't be with them no more. You have to separate yourself from them. And Abraham had to separate himself from Lot. God got his way, and now is God's second visit to Abraham. And God has some words to tell Abraham. Some good words. You can't get your way with God. I want you to understand that. If God tells you, I want you to do this, and you say, well, I don't want to do this, or I just want to do it halfway, trust me, God's going to get his ways. I remember a certain preacher once told me that he was handicapped because of a disobedience with God. God had told him to preach, and he said, I don't want to preach the word. I just want to go to church and sit down and be with my family. I don't need to do this. Well, God put this man in a position where the only thing he could move was his head. And the guy said, Lord, if you will allow me just to sit up and to be able to at least move my arms, I will preach your word. Then he was able to move his arms and able to sit up, but yet he was not able to walk. The man started preaching the word in a wheelchair, and he stood preaching in the wheelchair, preaching sitting on a wheelchair till he passed away. But I want you to understand something. God got his way. Because God always gets his way. Did not God get his way with Jonah? And sometimes God could even use our disobedience. Yes, even our disobedience, God could use it to save somebody from their sins. He did with Jonah. Jonah was disobedient to God. He ran away the other place that he wasn't supposed to. And yet in the ship, all those pagan men came to know the God of Israel. God will even use our disobedience for his glory. But yet God will still get his ways, because Jonah ended up going the wrong way to the point that God made him turn around and do his job and preach to Nineveh, preach to Assyria. God will always get what he wants. And God got what he wanted with Abraham. Abraham, I want you to separate yourself from your family. Oh, wait a minute, God. Do I really have to separate from my dad and my brother and my nephew? Yes, I want you to separate from your family. Well, like I said before, his father's dead, his brother's dead, and there's one left, and he goes somewhere else. Eventually, Abraham has to send his servant to him so he could find for his son Isaac a wife later on. But Lot ends up splitting and not staying with Abraham. And now God is ready to make his second appearance. And we're going to read this as soon as we hear another song.
Softly and tenderly Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home, ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, O sinner, come home. Why should we tarry when Jesus is pleading, pleading for you and for me? Why should we linger and heed not his mercies, mercies for you and for me?
Come home, come home, ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, O sinner, come home.
Oh, for the wonderful love he has promised, promised for you and for me. Though we have sinned, he has mercy and pardon, pardon for you and for me. Come home, ye who are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, O sinner, come home. Come home.
We're back, and we're now going to speak about the second appearing of God to Abraham. Verse 14 of Genesis 13. And the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now, and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever, your seed. Oh, Abraham, it's time for me to tell you, I'm going to give you this land. And this is something that God repeats constantly to Abraham, and not just to him, but to Isaac, and not just to Isaac, but to Jacob as well. We read this in Genesis 12, verse 7. God tells Abraham the first time, to your descendants I will give this land, and there he built an altar to the Lord who appeared to him. Now, in Genesis 13 again, we see in this appearing, and we see in Genesis 15:7, then he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of the Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it. Genesis 15:18, on the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river to Egypt, to the great river, the river Euphrates. And God gave this land, and we're going to study that God did give this land. He did get to give this land to Abraham, to his descendants. Not Abraham personally didn't get to see himself with the land, but his descendants got to see the land. God says in verse 16 of Genesis 13, and I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. So if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length, its width, for I give it to you. Then Abraham moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. God appears to Abraham. You know, I said that this was the third time that God appears to Abraham, the second time, but it was actually the third time. We see God appearing to him in Genesis 12, verse 1, and then again in Genesis 12, verse 7, and now he appears to him in Genesis 13, verse 14. This is the third time. God appears to him the third time to tell him, I'm going to give you this land that I promised to your descendants. And he did receive the land. His descendants received the land in the time of Solomon. In the time of Solomon, all that land was received. Solomon had all that land. Yes, all that land belonged to Solomon. We'll see this as soon as we play next hymn. Let's play another hymn.
Before
Hallelujah. I said we was going to look at where Solomon reigned, and I had it in First Chronicles, and then I lost it. I believe it was First Chronicles chapter... Yes, hold on one second. First Chronicles chapter 9, verse 26. So he, Solomon, reigned over all the kings from the river, that means the Euphrates, to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. So God promised Abraham, later we'll see the details of what he promised. And I think when we get to chapter 15, and he gives Solomon this land. Israel did get to rule that land, the whole land. It's a shame that the current president that we have is not for Israel. He doesn't believe that the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. And I believe God is striking him because if it's up to him, he will take land from Israel, from the Jewish people. He will take land from them to give it to the Palestinians. Anyway, that land belongs to Israel. There's something interesting that we're told in Genesis 13. The Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. Looking in all the directions. There's 4 directions. North, south, east, and west. And there's 4 directions in the cross. Up, down, left, and right. Well, if you put the cross on the floor, where do you get? North, south, east, and west. I want you to look at the cross. I want you to think of the benefits that we received from the cross of Christ. And think about these things. Because there, your promise, abundance of life, everlasting life, forgiveness of sins, redemption, restoration before God. It's good to know the Lord. And even with a person like me giving this study, sometimes I do mess up while I'm giving studies. I said that was the 2nd time that the Lord appeared to him. It was actually the 3rd time. Well, I'm sorry if I messed up on that. And as humans, we do mess up eventually in saying things. But thank God that we correct ourselves. And thank God that the program is live. So, you could call here while I'm doing the program. And if I'm not in a testimony moment time, I will receive your phone call and we could dialogue. If you need prayer, we'll pray for you. My phone number is 215-432-6287 if you wish to call, if you need prayer. Or if you just want to tell me, hey, Pastor Harris or Preacher Harris, I really like your program and I'm praying for you. Well, that will give me a lot of strength to continue on. And we will continue. I heard some great news, and it was from my brother. I was saying to myself, when I'm going to start pastoring again, when I'm going to start preaching again in the churches, because it seemed like every church has closed their door for me. And And a brother told me this. He told me, Pastor Harris, I want to dedicate my house to the Lord. I'm going to buy a house and I want to dedicate it to the Lord. And I want you to have services there. And this is a brother that, if I could, I'll make him my co-pastor. And because he knows the word, and me and him could debate too. And I want him to eventually to come to this program, and he'll be giving studies here as well. And the studies that we have in that church will definitely be recorded on the podcast. That will probably be in a few months from now, hopefully. And there's a door open there to start a congregation, hopefully. Now, what I want you to understand something. The door may close for you for a moment, but it's because God has another door open for you. I've said this before, I think. When the Anglican churches closed the doors for George Whitefield, John Wesley, and Charles Wesley, the ghettos and the fields were open for them to preach to the rejected of the society, to the poor, to those in need. The word was able to be preached to them. Sometimes God will close your door to open you a great, grander door, and I believe God is doing that. Anyway, I wanted to tell you also, if you have a testimony that you wish to send, you can email it to me at revkakalides@gmail.com, and we'll have it in our podcast. And we will continue with studying the scriptures. And if you see me correcting myself, don't worry. If you have to erase something that you wrote in the notes and correct it, it happens. It happens to all of us. My programs is not edited, so you get what you get. If you get to see there are mistakes that sometimes I make, and I'll be honest with you, brothers and sisters. I don't even know how to cut and snip when it comes to this software that I use. I don't know how to cut and snip with this. Maybe one day I'll probably learn, and I'll be able to give you a pre-recorded program with less mistakes. But then again, you're seeing me as a human making mistakes, and that's the thing that has to happen with all of us. We can't say, "Oh, this person's perfect; they don't make mistakes." We all make mistakes. One just has to listen to somebody record without the corrections, without the editing. And you'd be like, wow, that person made a mistake here, or there, and the other. You understand? We're humans, and we're bound to make mistakes. But yet God could use those imperfections. He could use this sermon, this study, to bring His glory about. And He usually does. Charles Spurgeon once preached a terrible sermon. I said this before, and then to him, it was a terrible sermon. And the next week, he proposed to say, well, I'm going to redeem myself next week, and I'm going to preach the best sermon. I'm going to study hard, and I'm going to give the best sermon. And he said, let me observe these two. Which one will be more greatly effective? Well, he found out that 40 people converted from that bad sermon. And that perfect sermon that he preached that got the applause of many, not one soul came to Christ. God used that sermon that was so, in his mind, so bad, and God did not use the other sermon. God will use your imperfections rather than use your perfections. It is the weak that says, I am strong. It is the lowly that says, I have my God with me. Be strong, brother and sister. God will meet you in your weakness and show his glory to all. Lord bless you, and I'll see you next program of Mr. Kakalides and the Bible Podcast. So long.